Good evening and welcome to Plainfield Parent Community Network's third of a four-part series on digital safety, helping my child navigate online aggression. This is Plainfield Parent Community Network's fifth year. We'd like to thank all of our sponsors, including Plainfield Counseling Center, Seminar Marketing Pro, and Kwame Raoul's Illinois Attorney General's Office. Plainfield Parent Community Network is a volunteer network of parents, educators, and professionals committed to creating resources and opportunities for mental health support and education in the Plainfield community. Our mission is to provide lifelong learning in our ever-changing society, working in collaboration with school, home, and community. You can find us on the web at plainfieldpcn.org or on Facebook or Twitter. Any questions or comments can be emailed to plainfieldpcn@gmail.com. We will be posting future events on that website. But tonight, we're very excited again to have our wonderful speaker, Carolyn Orr, who is an Internet Safety Specialist with the Illinois Attorney General's Office, High Crimes Bureau, ICAC Task Force. Her role involves providing public outreach, research, and education and prevention. She also teaches college sociology, social psychology, and criminology with a background in social and behavioral sciences. Her overall goal within these positions is to spread awareness, encourage positive leadership among youth, promote safety, and prevent further victimization of innocent children and families. So without further ado, Carolyn, thank you again for joining us this evening. I know it's a wonderful day out there and we're glad to have you here.
So Thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so if you have tonight we'll be talking about online aggression, which basically is cyberbullying. So I've noticed kind of a trend where, or not a trend, but I've seen it a few times where parents have said things like, oh, we're tired of hearing about cyberbullying. It's like pounded into our minds. We're hearing it constantly from the school or from wherever. And even sometimes teachers and the kids are tired of hearing about cyberbullying. This is what I hear sometimes, but it's still really important to talk about because it's still happening very often to many kids, and many kids are being impacted by this in the same way that kids are being impacted by, in-person bullying. So I think it's still important to talk about it. I think if we don't talk about it and we don't, have some awareness of it, then we would definitely be doing a disservice to, children in our communities. We want to make sure that they're safe and make sure that they feel comfortable going to school and that, they don't feel like they can't be a part of the community or part of the school setting or even part of the online setting. So this will be a little bit of a repeat, this part right here. If you already have attended the past webinars, you've already seen a little bit about ICAC. But if you're new to the webinar, because I know sometimes people, not everyone is doing all four of them. So if you're new to the webinar and you haven't heard of Illinois ICAC yet, it stands for Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. So it's part of the Attorney General's High Tech Crimes Bureau. And it's a task force made up of a whole bunch of people that have different roles and responsibilities, but with the main mission of trying to protect children from online crimes. So we prosecute and investigate online crimes that happen to children in the state of Illinois. So we've got over 250 task members. We've made over 1,700 arrests of child predators. And that number is actually higher than that because that data is as of November 2020. And, just in the last months from November, we probably have our investigators are out on search warrants to make arrests for these types of crimes just about every week. There's about 2 or 3 per week. So the number is even higher than that. Unfortunately, it just keeps going up. So we also train law enforcement agencies. We help them out with, our attorneys will give them guidance as far as how they need to, how to preserve evidence, and especially because there's a lot of information when it comes to technology. So not everybody that's an investigator out there or a police officer always has all of the information on, how to get a search warrant for conversations in an app or something like that. So our attorneys will often train police officers with a little bit of that information, how to make sure that, none of their evidence is going to get thrown out. We also have a lot of high-tech technology. I guess that's saying high tech technology is a little weird, but we have a lot of technology that helps us to solve these crimes. So when I'm talking about these crimes, I'm talking about, when someone tries to entice a child, when someone's trying to get a child to meet up, or if someone's talking about inappropriate things with kids and trying to get them to send them inappropriate images, all of those types of things that are existing out there. So we also provide, training and webinars for parents, teachers, kids all across the state. This is a list here of the cases that we would cover. So we work hand in hand with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they run the National Clearinghouse for cyber tips. So, and I'll show you the slide for that in a little bit, but if you go to cybertipline.com or cybertipline.org, you can make a report there if you ever come across something that is if you see something online that is abusive towards a child, exploitative in some way, or sexually explicit. You can report that to the cyber tip line and they'll look into it. They have analysts that will look into that information. They do some tracing of IP addresses and other techniques that they have for that. And then if it happens to be a case that traces to Illinois, then they would send it to our investigators and they would take it from there. So these are some of the things, unfortunately and disturbingly, about 90% of our cases have to do with child sexual abuse material, which is also known as child pornography. We're really trying to kind of change that terminology, because a lot of times when people hear the word child pornography, they tend to think of a consensual activity or something that someone's getting paid for. And when you see little children and these types of videos that people are putting out there on the internet or on the dark web, this is definitely abuse. So we want to call it what it is, because we don't want to give the impression that kids are consenting to their own abuse or their own victimization. So there's a shift in just the language on how to talk about that. And sometimes people will ask the question of, well, what about teenagers or young teens that are taking pictures of themselves and sending it to their friends or boyfriends or girlfriends? That's not really abuse, but it's still actually classified as child pornography. So that is also referred to as child sexual exploitation material. So these are some of the other things that we look at on this list here. And something kind of neat that I like to mention, and if you were, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last one, but I'm pretty sure in the first one I did, but we also have dogs. These are electronic detection dogs. They're really cool. They have a very special skill where they can smell the scent of electronics. So they can smell flash drives, hard drives, computers, tablets, cell phones, anything having to do with electronics, they can sniff that out. And they are very helpful when there's a search warrant and there's evidence that needs to be found. And if, sometimes people can't find very small things. And even when, the officer's on a search warrant, well, search an entire home and try to find everything. Sometimes things can be missed. So these dogs are very helpful for those situations. So one example that I've given before, there was a man who was creating child sexual abuse material. He was abusing kids. He was putting this stuff online. It was in different places on the dark web and other areas of the internet. And it was reported. And when they did a search warrant, they tried to find the evidence. So it traced back to this person's home. They tried to find that evidence and they couldn't find it anywhere. So they brought in this dog. His name is Browser, and he searched the entire house. He smelled everything, walked over to one of the walls and sat there and put his nose pointing upward and just sat very still. And that's how they indicate that they found something. They just go to it, point their nose in the direction and wait. And the officers looked at the wall and there was nothing on the wall except for a clock. So they pulled the clock down and they took it apart and pulled off the back. And inside that clock was a little tiny flash drive. And on that flash drive were all of those abusive videos of children. So luckily, with the help of this dog, they were able to get all the evidence that they needed to make sure that that these kids see justice and that this person can no longer harm anyone. That they can go to jail and no longer touch any more children in the way that, or abuse them in the way that he was. So these dogs are really helpful. I mean, it's a shame that we even have to have this. It's a shame that this type of thing even exists out there, but it's really good that we have these types of resources and we have these awesome dogs to help us, because they literally do help, to solve crimes and to protect kids. So like I was just saying, we work with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They're a little bit more popular. I feel like a lot of people have heard of them. You've probably seen them or seen speakers from their organization on TV shows, things like Unsolved Mysteries. John Walsh is the founder of this organization after his child was missing um, years back. I believe that was in the early 80s. But so they have a little bit more public attention. A lot of people know about them, but every state actually has an ICAC task force. So a lot of people that I talk to have never heard of us before, but we're actually all over the place. So it's federally funded, but every state runs their own. So there's an ICAC task force, Internet Crimes Against Children, in every state. So tonight we'll talk about online aggression. What are some of the, just the concepts and terms having to do with that? How often is it happening? Where is it happening? Who's participating and why? What are some of the behaviors associated with it? And what are some good ways to respond to that? So something kind of interesting that would be really good and beneficial to talk to kids about is just knowing that distinction, that there's a difference between things like good teasing, maybe unintentional teasing when someone says something and they didn't, they were kind of teasing and they didn't really mean to hurt someone's feelings. And then that bad teasing that is a start to bullying and full on bullying or cyberbullying. Sometimes kids don't know the distinction. Sometimes, kids will say, oh, I'm being bullied. And maybe someone was just kind of saying something to them in sort of a teasing kind of way. We just want to make sure that they understand the difference, because cyberbullying is really serious. It's continuous. It has detrimental effects, and a little bit of teasing from a friend or something like that doesn't fully constitute as cyberbullying. So just talking to them about, good teasing is playful and that's okay. And just kind of joking around among friends or people that you're comfortable with, a little bit of teasing can be okay. If they don't find, depending on, what is the person saying to them, but if they don't find it to be comfortable or funny, then they would definitely want to talk to their friend about that and let them know, I don't like that kind of teasing. Unintentional teasing would be when, someone's kind of playing around, being playful, but they might say something that isn't perceived as funny and hurts that child's feelings. And the bad teasing is when they're teasing them to specifically hurt them. And then bullying and cyberbullying is when that type of negative and harmful and just, rude, disrespectful, harassing type of teasing persists. So we want to talk to kids about that, but we also need to be aware that all of the states have their own definition of what cyberbullying actually is. Schools will even have their own definition. That doesn't mean that they're all, really different. They're pretty similar, but there's a slight variation in how states will define it, or how laws will define it, or how schools will define it, because that has to kind of flow into how they can handle it or how the law will handle it. So the definition will depend on, how the law will go from there, or how a school might be able to discipline for when those types of things are happening. So cyberbullying is any severe or pervasive physical or verbal act or conduct that includes communications that's being made between electronics. So when it says written electronically, that would be something typed out, so in comments on an app, in a game. But it's when it's directed towards a student or students and has or can be reasonably predicted to have an effect on one or more of the following. So the things that you see on this list here, if it's causing reasonable fear or harm to the self or to property, if it's having a substantial detrimental effect on physical or mental health of the child, if it's interfering with the child's academic performance, which oftentimes, it definitely does. If even if it's not kids that are from their school, let's say they're, online gaming and there's someone that's been bullying them, they're probably going to be upset about it. Sometimes they lose sleep over it, and sometimes it, can take over their thoughts and they're thinking about it and they're upset. So they're not always absorbing the information when they're in class and listening, because they're thinking about this problem that they're having. So also if it's interfering with participation in any kind of services, activities, sports, or things like that, if you start noticing a change in, how excited they are to maybe play a game of a sport that they're on, or if you start noticing that they don't want to be involved in activities anymore, or they don't want to join in on things that they used to want to join in on, that could be a sign that they're being cyberbullied. Let's see, I'm going to skip through all of these Illinois statutes. These are definitely something that Parents can look up if they're curious to look a little bit more at the deeper part of the Illinois statutes, or even if you're curious about the law. But just reading through those slides, I don't think is all that helpful because we know the definition. But seeing how often it's happening. So there's some really interesting research that's out there. If you go to cyberbullying.org, they have, it's Samir Hinduja and Justin Patchen, and they do a lot of research on cyberbullying. Over the past years, they've been doing all kinds of surveys and collecting all kinds of data when it comes to cyberbullying to see who it's happening to, how often is it happening. But we do see a little bit of a difference, not a huge disparity though, between males and females. But when children were asked, so this is on a sample of 5,600 kids, so that's a lot of kids. But when they were asked if they have been cyberbullied in the past 30 days, about 16% of males said that they were, and 17% of females. So you might be thinking, well, because that's really close. Sometimes people have a stereotype that girls are the ones that are doing all the cyberbullying online. I've heard, kids say that girls are more dramatic than boys, so they're the ones involved. But the numbers are really not that different between boys and girls. Or if you ask them if they have been bullied at all in their lifetime, it's also pretty close. So thinking about these numbers, just looking at this, the numbers look pretty low. It looks like if, you might be thinking, okay, 16, 17% of kids, that's relatively low. Or even if you're looking at, have they ever been cyberbullied in their lifetime? 30%. That's a third of all the participants in the study. So that's a third of children. And to some, that still seems kind of low. Some people think, well, a third is still not the majority. So that's a good thing. But when you think about that in the context of their school, in the context of your town, the state, the country, the global population, that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids that are being bullied. It's a lot of kids that are facing emotional, issues and mental issues as a result of it. So it's still a really important issue. Some studies will show that in-person bullying is happening more often than cyberbullying, but it kind of depends on what study we're looking at. And it's also going to depend on this past year because a lot of kids haven't been in school. So some kids have actually, unfortunately, we've heard some different studies that have shown that kids have actually done better in school over the pandemic because those were the kids that were being bullied in school. So now that they're home all day, I know school just went back not too long ago, depending on what part of the state we're in, but some kids were doing better over the pandemic and while schools were closed because they didn't have to face those kids at school that were bullying them, or they didn't have to face the kids that might be bullying them online, but they didn't have to see them in school. So that's really unfortunate. So just, talking to kids about bullying, encouraging kindness, respect, and, just having a good attitude towards their peers and even people that are not their friends is really important so that they won't engage in this kind of behavior. And also in the last few webinars that we did, we talked about impulsivity, which can sometimes contribute to bullying because sometimes kids that are more impulsive might feel, inclined to kind of jump in and do what the other kids are doing if they see bullying happening and they might not be thinking of those consequences. So this is some more research that shows cyberbullying over time and school bullying. So school bullying meaning the in-person bullying. So you can see the numbers are, according to this study, the numbers are much higher when you ask kids if they've ever been bullied in their lifetime in school or online. About a third of kids have been bullied online, and about 70% of kids report being bullied in school. So that is a pretty big difference. So some might say, well, then why are we worried about cyberbullying? We really should be worried about both, right? I mean, I'm not saying we should be worried every day thinking about this and having it take over our thoughts or anything, but it's something that we should be concerned about and that we should care about because it is an important issue, whether we're talking about cyberbullying, because we don't want, even if those numbers are much lower, we don't want that to keep increasing to get to the point of where it's at for in-school bullying. So we can prevent that by having those conversations, checking in a lot on our kids, making sure that we're keeping track of who they're talking to and what their behaviors are like, looking for those changes and fluctuations in behaviors. A lot of parents will ask the question, well, where is this happening more often? Because then I want to keep my child off of those apps. The problem with that question, or I guess the answer, is there really isn't an answer because it happens all over the place. It just depends on the interactions. It depends on who's using it. Same thing with issues of, people asking kids when there's older people posing as younger kids and they're asking kids for inappropriate images, nude pictures, things like that. There isn't really one app over another app that's worse than another because it can happen all over the place. Anytime you have strangers interacting with kids, anytime you have kids that have public accounts, they're more vulnerable. So, and another thing that happens sometimes is if we start saying something like, okay, the worst app for this is Instagram. It's happening so much on Instagram. What happens is a lot of parents will, prevent their children from communicating with anyone on Instagram, and then they just migrate to another app. And the same thing happens with the cyberbullies. Same thing happens with the predators. They move to the apps where the kids are. Oops, I didn't realize some of these didn't pop up. Okay, so why do students participate? They oftentimes feel invincible. We talked about this a little bit in the last couple webinars, where even though there's a large audience when you're online and when you're using social media, oftentimes kids still feel that they're anonymous because they aren't seeing the reactions of people in the moment as it's happening. They don't have a reaction in real time. So that kind of leads them to believe that it's not that big of a deal. And you're not seeing someone's facial expressions. You're not seeing a verbal response to what you're saying. So it's easy for kids to just, kind of let loose and say whatever they want and, hurt other people. And it's not that kids are the only ones doing this. Adults do it too. So kids that have issues with empathy or kids that have trouble feeling empathy or experiencing that, they have a higher likelihood to participate in cyberbullying. And sometimes that's, something that we can guide them with, and we can teach them that. Sometimes, unfortunately, some kids have trouble with that as a result of maybe other issues that are going on. So it's really important to talk about empathy with kids. Empathy is the ability to, understand someone else's experience, to try to put yourself in their shoes, think about how that person would feel before treating them in a certain way, and letting that kind of guide you, and being kind to another person, being respectful, and trying to really encourage those values in kids. Also, if there's no monitoring, if parents are not checking in and looking at the types of apps they're using, if they're not, even looking at things like their friends lists and wondering who they're talking to. I'm not saying you need to go through all of your, all the conversations that your child is having. And of course, that if you want to do that, you can. I do get some parents that will say, well, I don't want to invade their privacy because I want to teach them that privacy is important. And I want them to know that I respect their privacy, which is also a great thing too. But at the same time, we also need to remember cyberbullying is not the only issue. There's also issues of, predators out there. So there's definitely nothing wrong with doing safety checks. And that's all in the, efforts to protect your child, not to spy on them. And making sure that they're aware of that is helpful, even if you want to instill, the concept of privacy and teach them about privacy. You can still do that with having them understand why you would need to look at their apps or their games or their interactions sometimes. So oftentimes cyberbullying is happening, when students participate in cyberbullying behaviors. They're targeting things like another person's appearance, maybe the shape of their body or their weight, maybe their race or their ethnic background, sexual orientation, family income, class, religion, differently abled children. All of those different things are oftentimes, the target of bullying. And I have had some parents say things like, well, it's just a part of growing up. It creates character, or it builds character to have them be picked on a little bit. And most psychological studies that are out there show that it's not a positive part of growing up. Being able to handle it or navigate it better is a good thing, because we're always, everyone's going to face some kind of negative experiences, of course, but we still should make sure that we're talking to kids about, why it's important not to hurt other people in that way, and why it's important to talk about it if you're being hurt by someone else in that way. And not try to say things like, oh, it's not a big deal. I dealt with that when I was a kid, or you'll be fine, something like that, because then it leads the child to think that their feelings don't matter, that they can't share their emotions with you. And when other things throughout life happen, they might not come to you and talk to you about it because they might remember that you said something to them like, well, get over it, big deal. Or, it's part of life, grow up, or something like that. But we do want to take it seriously and help them to navigate the situation, help them to cope with it, help them to stay positive instead of just dismissing them when they come to you about this. So kids that have better skills with self-managing their emotions, their behaviors, a little bit more self-aware. So this rolls into what we talked about in the last 2 weeks. Kids that have had a little bit more learning when it comes to how to make good, responsible decisions and think critically through situations, or even have better relationship skills or adult presence and good support around them, tend to be the kids that either can get through if they're a victim of cyberbullying, they can kind of navigate that situation a little bit better and it doesn't detrimentally affect them quite as harsh. And also, those are the kids that don't participate in cyberbullying. So this doesn't mean that your kids have to be perfect to be kind to each other and to use the internet responsibly. It just means that these are things that are important, and these types of social skills are going to make it so that kids have a much lower likelihood to even want to be involved in cyberbullying, to even want to participate in that kind of thing. When I talk to kids in schools, I usually tell them, especially the teenagers, because a lot of times teens have this view where, if they can put somebody down or if they can, give a really harsh comeback, then they look really cool and everyone's going to think they're cool for it. But I try to let them know, usually some psychological studies will show that people that are more confident are not cruel to other people, because typically people that are cruel to others, and this goes for adults and kids, they're looking to fill some kind of void. They're looking to create or establish some kind of perceived power or perceived status. So if I always tell the kids, if you're going to bully other kids, you're really just showing them that you're not confident in yourself, and you're really revealing that you're really insecure. Sometimes when I say that to teens, they kind of look around like, oh, really? So it's a good thing to let them know, if you're confident in yourself and you're cool with who you are, you don't need to put others down to feel better. You just go about your life and do your thing. And you don't have to, be involved in that kind of drama, and you don't have to be involved in those types of put downs.
Hey, I just got another one. Looks like we're doing worthless next. I think there's some room on my back.
The hurt of digital harassment can last forever. There's a thin line between words and wounds.
So that was just a little short clip that I would typically show to middle schoolers and high schoolers. I usually give them a warning, that there's going to be some bad words on there. They're not being spoken, but they see them on there. And sometimes it does get their attention, and it makes them listen a little more because they get kind of like, whoa, what's this? But, and then I'll ask them the question of, why would they use tattoos as a way to make a symbolic statement about cyberbullying? And it doesn't have, this is not putting down anyone with tattoos. It's not making a statement about tattoos in and of themselves, but it's just using that as a symbolic way to talk about how cyberbullying is something that can often be permanent. It can often stick with kids for a very long time. So sometimes people think that something that, is just an in the moment action, or we've put these words out there to someone that's, just in this one moment in time, it doesn't mean that's not going to have lasting effects, and it's not going to, have an impact on that child's psyche going forward. So also effects of cyberbullying, and this is definitely not every child, of course, but studies will show that, when kids are cyberbullied, especially if they're repeatedly bullied, whether it be in person or online, when they get that repetition of being bullied, they oftentimes feel a disconnect from their peers. They feel a disconnect from their society, even sometimes their community, because they don't feel like, they're valuable because someone has taken that away from them. And that can oftentimes, be something that's very similar in instances of abuse as well. So, but some kids have been, kids and teens have been reported as abusing drugs and alcohol as a result of consistent cyberbullying. could even develop eating disorders, maybe skip class and start doing poorly academically. They might stop using social media altogether. They might not want to be on it anymore. But I do get a lot of kids that will say, well, I don't want to block the person that's bullying me because I want to still see what they're saying about me. So I know what they're saying about me on social media. So then they don't block that person. So that person still knows that they're looking at, and that they you know, they almost perceive it as, well, they care about what I'm doing because they're still looking, they're still, you know, friends with me on social media. So they're going to keep continuing that type of behavior. So I always tell kids, make sure you block the person that's bullying you right away. Make a report, block that person, and don't try to keep looking at what they're saying about you, because eventually when they know that you don't have time for that, that you're not going to sit there, checking what they're saying all day, they're going to stop, hopefully, right? Um, but some kids do engage in self-harm. Some kids will, develop depression and anxiety. And unfortunately, some kids will have suicidal thoughts and make attempts. So, it definitely depends on the severity of the bullying. It also depends on the consistency of the bullying, but we want to stop it in its tracks before it, leads into something that's continuous and something that could lead to these lasting outcomes. So how to tell if your child is a victim. These are actually, interestingly, kind of similar to what you see when you look at information about how to tell if your child might be abusing drugs. I see some of the similar warning signs. But if your child is being bullied or cyberbullied by someone, they might become shy and withdrawn. They might get more moody, agitated, anxious. They might act a little bit more aggressive because they might be replicating that behavior and mimicking that behavior that has happened to them. So then they might do that to others. If they don't want to go to school, or if they don't want to play a game that they always enjoyed playing, if their grades start to drop, if they have changes in eating and sleeping habits. So that kind of goes back to on that last graph that we looked at, where some kids can develop eating disorders from consistently being bullied. They might attempt self-harm. They might change their friend group, and maybe they'll stop using digital devices. They might not want to get on their, phones or their tablets anymore because it's stressing them out, and they want to put that aside. So if you see a fluctuation or a change in, how often they're using their phone or they're using their tablet, and you see that it's becoming less and less, that might be a good thing if they're, doing other things outside and stuff like that. So, it could just be summertime. They want to, it's getting to be summer. They want to go out and do things outside. It could be an indication that they just want to get off their computers already. But it could also be, if they have any of these other warning signs, might just be a cause for concern, or maybe even just to prompt a conversation. So nobody wants their kid to be, nobody wants their child to be bullied, but nobody wants their kid to be the bully, right? If you notice that when you're around your child, they stop using their computer or their phone when someone comes near you, they close their laptop really quick, or they shut down the screen that, maybe you see that they're on one screen, and when you come closer, they swipe over and they change it to something else, or they close out the app that they're in. They could be doing that for other reasons too, but that could be an indicator that they're up to something that maybe they know is inappropriate, or it's a behavior that they know they shouldn't be participating in. If they look nervous or jumpy when they're online, if they're being pretty secretive about their online activity, maybe spending more time on their digital devices, that might mean that they are, bullying another child or bullying many children. They might get really angry when you take away their internet privileges, because if they're bullying someone, and in their mind, that's building up kind of this sense of power and this sense of status, they're trying to maintain that. And if you take away, their ability to go online, they might get really mad, because in their view, that power is going to be diminished, or that dominance that they've been portraying, towards someone else is going to be diminished. So if you see some of these things, again, this would be a good reason to have a conversation and take a look at their interactions that they're having online. For kids and parents, when it comes to responding, sometimes, sometimes kids are not exactly sure who to tell. And like I've said before, sometimes kids don't want to tell their parents when they're being cyberbullied, harassed, or, if someone's bothering them, or if a stranger is requesting information from them. Oftentimes kids don't want to tell their parents, not because they don't trust you, and not because they don't feel safe with you, but because they're afraid that you're going to take their device away. When I say device, I mean their phone or their tablet, their laptop. They, to them, that's like cutting them off from their life. That's their lifeline. They're, so many kids are just so embedded in their digital devices that they're afraid if I say, mom or dad, I'm being cyberbullied by this person. It's happening a lot. It's really bothering me. They're afraid that the parent's going to say, well, maybe we should, maybe you shouldn't be using these apps, or maybe you shouldn't be playing these games anymore. Or maybe we're going to take the phone away from you to end the problem. That's why they oftentimes won't go to parents. So it's a good idea if you, it depends on the age of your child, but if your children or your child has their own phone, and if you've allowed them to be on social media, it's a good idea in the very start to let them know if someone is cyberbullying you, if someone's harassing you, if someone is, requesting things that are inappropriate, makes you uncomfortable, or if a stranger is trying to communicate with you and something's not right, always come to me and talk to me about it. I won't take your phone away. I'm going to help you solve the problem, because that will make them feel like, okay, I won't lose my phone, because that's the biggest thing for them, right? They don't want to lose their game if they're playing Xbox or something like that. They don't want to lose those things because they love those things. So if they know from the start, before there's even ever a problem, that they're not going to be punished for, something that they can't control, and they know that you're not going to take that away. You're going to help them make a report and help them figure out a good solution to the problem. They're going to be more likely to come to you when these problems do occur, or if they do occur. So I usually tell kids, always, if someone's cyberbullying you, bothering you, unfriend them, unfollow them, and block them. First, take some screenshots and let the kids know to tell a trusted adult. I usually tell kids to have a few trusted adults in their mind who they feel comfortable talking to. Sometimes I know a lot of parents are like, well, that should be me. That would be me. Some kids will say to me, it's not my mom and dad. It's actually one of my aunts or uncles, or it's my grandparents because they have more time for me or something like that. But just kind of talking to them about who they can trust and who they have as a trusted adult, already kind of the go-to person in the back of their mind. What adult is in their life that is a support for them. It's good for them to kind of pick out a few of those and have, maybe 3 or maybe 5 of those kind of already in their mind, so they know who to go to, if not the parent, of course. So if they come to you, help them make a report. A good thing is to report within the apps. Sometimes people think it's no big deal, nothing's going to happen, I'm just going to make this report and it's going to be floating out there with a million other reports. But they do have, so all of the apps and games have electronic monitors that are, viewing these reports. It's searching for keywords and things like that. But they also do have humans that review some of these reports depending on the nature of the report. I've met with some people that work on a team for Google, that work on a team for Roblox, and their goal is basically, or their job is basically just to look at these reports, and if it involves any kind of criminal activity, then they report it to law enforcement. All of the apps and games, they actually have a federal mandate to report to law enforcement if there's something illegal going on and and the user is thought to be a child. Most of the time, that type of thing is more for inappropriate pictures or videos, or that type of illegal content. But cyberbullying can fall into that category as well. So if the child is being bullied by someone that they consider to be one of their friends, so I guess it really wouldn't be their friend if they're bullying them, but we know that when kids are young, their friend groups change sometimes, especially when they start getting into middle school, high school. Friend groups kind of switch around. Sometimes, attitudes start to change, things like that. But it would be a good idea to encourage them to, if they're facing some kind of cyberbullying from someone that was a friend, instead of, just getting so upset over it, encourage them to put their technology down for a little while, cool down, think it through, and try to encourage them to have an offline conversation. Even if that's, I know it's been difficult over the past year, but having an in-person conversation gives them that opportunity. And we've mentioned this before, but gives them that opportunity to see that person face to face. They can see each other's facial expressions. They can pick up on those emotions, the body language, all of that. And oftentimes when you're talking face to face with someone, it's going to end up a lot smoother than it would if they're just sitting there, texting in a little box and putting all their anger, into words and hitting send. So try to encourage a face-to-face conversation, even a Zoom conversation where they can see each other, they can see their faces. I know that doesn't always work, but it's a good start to try. And again, encouraging them to talk to their trusted adults when these things do happen, so that way they can get some guidance. That can also be a school counselor, school psychologist, whoever it is that they trust to help them solve a problem. So what you can do also, if you're not sure how to make a report in these apps, usually the kids know how. When I ask kids, even the really young kids, I say, how many of you know how to report something that's bad that happens when you're playing this game? If someone's, says something harmful to you or is harassing you, or, does something that, that's not right. And do you know how to make a report? The kids all raise their hand. They know how. Because they've grown up, with social media. They've grown up with these games in their lives and they know how to navigate them pretty easily. Oftentimes it's the parents that aren't really sure. So if you need to make a report in an app, you can always, look it up. You can, just do an internet search on it. You can look in the app. If they're having trouble with someone, let's say on Snapchat, and maybe you don't use Snapchat and you're like, I don't know how to, I don't know how to make the report. Figure it out. I don't even use Snapchat. You can still, even without having the app, you can still do an internet search on how to report in Snapchat. You could sit down with your child and help them go through those steps if they don't know how to do it. And remember that those people that work for those apps are the first set of eyes that can see what is, the cyberbully. What else are they doing? Are they having inappropriate communications with other kids? Was there anything that's, sexually explicit or, exceptionally violent, or something that would need to be, sent over to law enforcement to take it from there? So make sure that you're helping them learn how to block if they're not sure, privacy settings, all of those things. And report. We just talked about reporting. So we'll go on to the next one. So sometimes parents aren't sure when, is an appropriate time to report to law enforcement. If someone is cyberbullying and it's not just, any longer, saying horrific things about, maybe their family, the way they look, their income level, their race. If it's also including things like threats of violence or threats to harm, physical harm, that is considered a crime. So you can report that to your local law enforcement. You could even report that to us, because that crosses the line. It's not something that is viewed as just, teasing. So if there's any in this bullying that's going on, if there's any child pornography, or if kids are being coerced to send sexually explicit messages or photos or videos or things like that. I mean, we've had some people that have talked young children into taking explicit pictures and videos of their little siblings and have pretty much blackmailed them. They've told them, if you don't send this to me, I'll do this. And oftentimes we think that kids will say, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do that. My parents will kill me. Or no, that's gross. Why would I do that? But it's sad to know how easily they can be convinced. They're very young. Sometimes they're very trusting to someone. Sometimes they're unfortunately a victim of a grooming process that's gone on for a long time, where someone will ask them, say, I trust you, you trust me, or we like each other. Send me a picture of you that's really revealing, or send me a naked picture. Sometimes kids will just send it. And I've actually read through conversations before that surprise me, but also don't surprise me, where you see someone has asked a child, send me this picture of you with no clothes on. And they respond with, no, I don't think I should do that. And it only took a few more words, a few more sentences of coercion, and then the child did it. So if there's anything like that involved in any of the conversations, that's a whole different level. Cyberbullying has gone into another level that includes other things like coercion and sextortion. And we'll talk about that we'll talk a little bit more about those things in the next webinar, because we're going to talk about enticement of children, and that includes issues of sextortion and a lot more about the predator actions. So also, if someone takes a video or a photo of you when you are in a place that is considered to be private. So if your child is in their school locker room and someone is taking a picture of them or taking a video of them without their consent, this is also a crime. You know, we've had some issues where there was a case where a girl took a video of another girl in the gym locker room, and she was getting dressed, so she didn't have all of her clothes on. And that video spread throughout the entire school. It ended up all over the internet, and who knows how much farther it spread from there, because people pass things on, you know, on the web. So anything that also involves stalking or hate crimes, these would all be things where you would want to report to your local law enforcement, or you could make a report to us as well. So I know, let's see, what time is it? Okay, I want to have a few minutes for questions if there are any. But you know, I always kind of end most of the webinars with this. We really want to encourage kids to not just be a good digital citizen. When we talk to kids about being a digital citizen, that means using the internet responsibly, using it to create, to learn, to, you know, build good connections and, you know, good positive things. And taking that one step forward, where it's not just about being a good digital citizen, but even being a good digital leader. So, you know, encouraging kids to build each other up, you know, be very respectful, be kind, be positive in their comments, be positive in their posts, even asking consent to post post other people's pictures. And I know sometimes that can be a little bit crazy because kids are posting things all the time, constantly. But, you know, telling them you really should ask your friends before you post their pictures, because what if they don't want that up there? And if they get in the habit of knowing that you should ask other people if that's okay first, that's a, you know, good trait for them to have in a number of other areas of life too. But also maybe other people won't, you know, they'll talk to their friends too about, you know, if they're going to ask their friends if it's okay, their friends might ask them if it's okay. And surprisingly, I've had some students talk to me about how their parents post a lot about them. And for some kids, that makes them uncomfortable. And then they're afraid to tell their parent that that makes them uncomfortable. I remember I had one young middle school girl. She was telling me that she doesn't use social media at all because she doesn't want anything on there. She wasn't ready to get involved with social media, but her mom is on Facebook and is constantly posting pictures of her. And she said it made her uncomfortable because she didn't even want to be on social media. So she was asking what's a good way to, you know, talk to her mom about that, because she was afraid she would just get in trouble, or her mom would just say, well, I'm the parent, I can do what I want, or something like that. So it's even a good lesson to ask your kids, do you mind if I put the pictures up from your birthday party? Or, you know, do you mind if I put these up so grandma and grandpa can see? Something like that. Encouraging them to choose their words wisely, think about their posts, and being an upstander rather than a bystander. This all kind of boils down to concepts of kindness and empathy. And I know sometimes people will say like, oh, we always have to talk about feelings, or, you know, why do we have to, you know, keep telling everybody to be kind or something like that. But it really is important, because our interactions are, you know, we interact with one person and that person interacts with another, and then it just keeps going on. And the more that we treat people with respect and kindness, and we think about other situations that are different from ours, instead of judging those situations, we can kind of, you know, connect and interact a lot more smoothly. And this can prevent things like cyberbullying. It can prevent in-person bullying. It can prevent all kinds of maltreatment towards other people, and all the things that you see on this list here. So at this time, if anybody has any questions, I would be happy to take your questions. You can put them in the chat box. Okay, let's see. All right, so I see a comment, it says it's hard to be an upstander. I definitely understand that. Sometimes it depends on the situation. I'll share a real quick situation in my neighborhood. One day, I live up on the north side of the city, up sort of near Evanston. And there was a day where I saw a guy outside, it looked like he was up to something. I know that sounds kind of weird. I wasn't judging him, but he didn't look like he was okay. And he was yelling at people, just randomly walking by. And I went into a food place, I picked up a salad, and when I came out, in that 5 minutes, that person had actually stabbed another person. And it was so interesting to look around and see everybody was shocked and nobody was doing anything. Nobody called 911. Nobody tried to help the other person. Sometimes it's really hard to be an upstander because we're scared for our own, you know, what's going to happen to us. In some situations, we might be hurt by jumping in on the situation. And I try to talk to college students, and we talk about these things too. If you think that you're going to get hurt or your life is going to be in danger, that's a situation where maybe you can't be an upstander. But at the very least, they could call 911. I might have been the only person that called 911 that day. So trying to encourage them to, be an upstander by saying something when they see something. They don't always have to actively do something, but they can make that report on the apps about cyberbullying, and they can also come to you. They can go to a parent that they trust. They can report to law enforcement if there's threats of violence. Let's see.
That was a question about the statute. I believe that was around slide 10 that you were talking about the different statutes.
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, I can go back up to the statutes. Let's see.
Or slide 9, maybe.
Yeah, that was in the beginning. Whoops, I must have passed it up. Okay, so here, this is the first one that I went over. This is the definition of cyberbullying. And then, okay, I'm sorry about that last part down there. So incidents no longer limited to school activity, or school issued devices. So what that means is, even if it's not happening on school property, let's say two students are involved in, a student is cyberbullying another student, even if it's not happening on school property and it's happening, after school hours, the school does have a right to involve themselves in discipline, because it disrupts their school environment and it disrupts that child's ability to learn. So here's the next one here. This is kind of just further going into what is that definition. And it says as of 2006, it's not old, it just hasn't changed since then. So this is the most recent. And then here is, I believe this is the last one. So this one shows you the law that each school district can make suitable provisions for instruction and bullying prevention. Talks about what does bullying prevention actually mean? What does that instruction include? And then there might be one more. Okay, so this is talking about school districts, policies, and how, like I said before, it does change across different schools, slight variations. They still have to abide by certain state statutes, but depending on also their policies when it comes to how they discipline, there might be slight variations in how they handle bullying or cyberbullying. That was the last one on there. All right. Let's see. I'm looking to see if I see any questions.
Some of that was about the survey. So we do like doing a survey for our participants. Again, being our 10th year, we've had so many different presentations. Thank you for your email. We'll get that out to everybody. We do use the survey to help guide the presentations that we have for next year. We do plan on going back to in-person presentations again. Our presentations have been attended by anywhere from 50 to 400 people. So again, we really do use your input, and we will make sure we get that survey out to you and make sure that you have access to it. So any last questions for Carolyn? Okay, so just a few final details here. This presentation was recorded. It will be on our website for anybody to view after, as well as all of the slides. So if you want to go back and you didn't get all those statutes, you can go back to the website. They are already posted, should be already posted both in English and Spanish. Our next event will be on May 27th, Preventing Unwanted Online Solicitation. It explores online solicitation of children. Parents, guardians can become aware of how children are solicited online and how to detect if their child has been victimized, as well as how to respond if solicited. Our final reminder for evaluations: if you are an educator and looking for CEUs or CPVUs, please email me directly and we'll make sure we get you the evaluation and the CEUs. And then I'd just like to thank again our PPCN committee members, Jenny Hamby, Kai Freeman, Mary Ellen Miller, Brian Sorg, Christine Belcastro, and Corey Warden. Thank you, everybody, for this wonderful event. And again, thank you, Carolyn. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Thank you.